this video we'll try to give you a feel for what it's really like to sail a 43-hour passage with just a crew of 2. The days before departure were dominated by very light winds. The settled conditions allowed us to anchor beside the beautiful St Michael's Mount near Penzance. The forecast for Sunday promised favourable winds around Land's End, with a fresh southerly then blowing us northwards up the Irish Sea. It's not often you get to pass this close to Longship's lighthouse, and that's Land's End Hotel behind it.
Well, it's the morning of day 2 of our passage north. We had a fantastic rounding of the Land's End, perfect conditions, then the wind died. It built overnight and we've been rolling steadily northwards ever since. It is pretty rolly at the moment, but we're making really good progress. As ever, on the first night of a passage we didn't sleep terribly well. It's just kind of getting used to the motion and the noises and so on, but we're not doing too badly. Radio noise in the background there, and we're watching the weather, but making good progress north.
Well, I'm pleased to say I've spotted the first dolphins and the first puffin just now, so I'm sitting here very smug.
So, as well as the electronic charting system, which is strobing badly on this film, I'm not quite sure why, just thought you'd show you what else we do in terms of navigation and recording what we're doing. So here's the old school charting technology, which is a great backup to have, and we've got different scales of charts for different parts, so this is quite a large scale one. So you can see our route though, so it's St Michael's Mount, round Land's End, past Longship's lighthouse. We went very close to it, and then that was our position at 8 o'clock last night, and we crossed effectively the entrance to the Bristol Channel, and that was us at 9:10 this morning. We then went past the Smalls, which is a lighthouse and guarding a horrible set of rocks, area to be avoided it says, and then we're heading north upwards, and just to the west of us in this purple is a TSS, traffic separation scheme, so ships have to go a bit like a motorway, northbound that side, southbound that side, because obviously it's a narrow area with risks and we have to keep out of it, so we went on the inside of it, and that's what we're doing. So this is a logbook. It's a legal requirement to keep a log. We do it hourly, some people don't do it quite as often. And we record time, the log, distance we've run, course, how far we run in the last hour, speed, wind speed, sea state, weather, visibility, barometer, the voltage on the batteries. That's important because obviously we need to make sure the house batteries stay well charged. If there's not much sun like today, we'll have to run the generator. We don't run that this morning. That's our position, latitude and longitude from our GPS, and then Dan's written here, first puffin. And we also make notes of any changes we've made to rig and so on. The interesting thing about coastal sailing is the tides and the currents, and as you can see from this was at 8 o'clock this morning, 8:43, so there's a standard set of charts what happens each hour as compared to Dover high water, and you can see more or less that the Irish Sea empties out that way and that way, and the length of the arrows and the thickness of the arrows will tell you how strong the tide is. And it also has a set of numbers, so you can see there it says 18,33. That means at neap tides, the slowest tides of the season, they are 1.8 knots, and at spring tides, every 2 weeks, they are at 3.3 knots. So if you've got those against you, that's not great. So this morning, as we were approaching the Smalls, we had the tide against us, and that did two things. It first of all slowed us down, but also because the wind was behind us, the tide was going that way, and it sort of rumped up the seas, so it was quite bumpy for a while. So we're now at coming up to 10:30, so this is 10:43. So as you can see, we're past the Smalls, and the arrows are getting smaller, and then we're going to get some hours of much more favourable tides. So that's 11:43. To go back to the beginning of the book. And then the tide's going with us, 12:22, 13:22, and then it gets really going for a couple of hours. So for most of the next 6-7 hours, we're going to have nice conveyor belt of tides taking us past the west coast of Wales, which is great. Not so great when it's against you. But our next challenge, as we arrive up towards Northern Ireland, is this tidal gate here at the top. Yeah, it's very, very busy. I've got a separate chart for this one, so we'll just have to watch it. But overall, we try and work out what the tide's going to do to us and how it will affect our speed. You can, of course, have all this plugged into your electronic chart plotter, and it does the maths for you, but it's A, it's much less fun, and B, it's good practice to know how to do this. The other piece of paper we keep here is actually a laminated sheet, is an AIS log sheet. So all big ships have AIS, which is Automatic Identification System, which will tell us who they are, where they're going, how fast, what direction. And it does some calculations because we've got an AIS machine on our boat, and it'll tell us how close we're going to get, so the CPA, closest point of approach. And what Di invented this sheet, which is to say if we see a boat that we think is of interest to us, so in this case the tanker Thon Lucy, we'll make a note of what time we saw it, what its heading was, how far the CPA, closest point of approach, is, and what time that would be, and also made a note of where it was going. And if it was getting closer and closer, we could see if that changed. We put further records on it, and if his heading hadn't changed and he was in a collision course, we could then call him up by name and say, excuse me, have you seen us, or do we need to keep out your way, depending on the collision regulations. So we've got a day of full day of this and a full night of this. If anything, the wind is going to increase. It's currently blowing about 16 knots, but has been up to about 20. But it's looking as though it might get up into the 20s, so we may have to put a reef in the sails, but it's going to stay from pretty much behind us or off our port side, which is good. We'd actually prefer it to be off our port side because it's a bit less rolly if it's got a bit of side pressure on the mast. So we will just get into the routine of trying to get some sleep where we can, one of us, and then we will keep going, and then think about getting some food and think about some getting through the night. And at the moment we are due to get into our target destination, which is Glenarm, early Tuesday, tomorrow evening. but we shall see how that works. We've got other places we can stop at earlier if we. So it's 5 o'clock on day 2, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and this is the reality of passage making. It's actually not very glamorous. It's cold and wet and grey out there. I'll just give you a shot out the window. Pretty dreary, really. So what we've got at the back here is the perspex washboards in there to keep the rain and the wind blowing into the cabin, and this is where we are really lucky to have this pilot house layout, so we can be down below here with a full view from starboard through ahead and to port, so we can do a proper lookout without having to go out into the cockpit and get wet and cold, which you would on a normal yacht. So I wouldn't want to do this trip in a non-pilot house boat, but otherwise we're doing okay. We've had that tide with us that we'd hoped for. So we've had 3 hours, we've done 8 knots, so we've been sailing about 7 and a bit, and then the extra push of the tide with us. That'll carry on for another couple of hours, then we'll get tide against us, but that's been very helpful. And we're just sort of kind of planning through the evening. So Dia's having some off-watch kip, hopefully, at the moment, and we'll have some supper. We do 3 watches on nights, so 8 till midnight till 4, and 4 till 8. So I did 2 watches last night, so Dia gets the 2 watches tonight, lucky her. So I'll go to bed at 8 o'clock and be up again at midnight till 4. Although the downside of that, you don't see any light at all, of course, in that watch. So that's the plan, and then tomorrow we're thinking that we might divert into the Isle of Man for a stop, because of the way the tides are going to look. If we carry on, we'll just hit tides on the nose as we come to the top of the North Channel between the Mull of Galloway and the Antrim coast of Northern Ireland. So I think if we can get up to the Isle of Man, it would make sense to stop and then have a day of recovery, and then be able to hit that the following morning just as the tide's going the right direction. Why beat yourself up? So anyway, so we'll keep on going. What I didn't mention is that the wind is building as it was forecast to do, so we've been having sort of typically 17-18 knots of wind behind us during the day, and it's gradually building, and we're currently getting about 23-24 knots, so we're getting close to a force 6, which is fine from behind us, and the boat's very solid, so she can cope with it. But as the wind builds, she starts to roll more as the seas build, and you want to keep under control. So I've just put a reef in the main to reduce the mainsail size. There are 3 reefs we've got, and I've put the first one in, and that will just mean that it takes a little bit of pressure off the rig, makes it a bit easier for Constance, our electronic autopilot, to keep the boat straight, because occasionally she gets a big kick from a wave and then she has to work pretty hard to straighten the boat up. But yeah, we'll see how that does. We've got option of putting another reef in. We might even put one in just in case before we go to bed, before it gets dark, just for safety. Never be afraid to reef a boat at night was the maxim I was taught. Well, good morning. It's 9 o'clock in the morning on day 3, Tuesday morning, and we've had quite a night, really. We had up to about 30 knots, so into a force 7 adjust. So we were down to 2 reefs in the main, and quite a lot way of the foresail reefed away, but the boat was fine. But the seas were really big when the tide changed against us in the Irish Sea, St George's Channel. We got some really kind of steep seas, but the boat managed marvellously. We bounced around a bit, but as I said in the last video, we think we're going to head into, we are going to head into Peel, the Isle of Man, A, for a bit of respite, and B, to catch better tides for the next bit going north. But overall, yeah, it was okay. We saw a lot of fishermen, certainly just south of the Isle of Man. We had a cluster of them to dodge, but otherwise, a few ships, no other yachts, strangely. Sailing. So the red target there is us approaching the Isle of Man, and if we're looking, and even though it's on the west side of the island, it faces north, so we'll have good shelter in the outer harbour here. As you can see, this all dries, and there's a gate into a marina in a harbour. We can't get in there at the moment, it won't be up until this evening, so we'll just either anchor or pick up a mooring just in this outer harbour and get some sleep, I think. Well, we're safely into Peel Harbour, and we're on the moorings because the harbour dries, so we're out here until about 6:30, probably 7 o'clock for the first gate opening. So they have to open a flap gate and then open a bridge, swing bridge, to let us in. But really friendly guy on the phone when I phoned him, and so I've been allocated a berth in the marina. We've had a little bit of sleep, and I've had a shower and feeling a bit more human. Overall, the trip was 43 hours, and I reckon I probably got about 4 hours sleep in that. We did 280 miles, so averaged about 6.5 knots, which is pretty good going, really, considering we had tide against us for some of the way. So very pleased with the result, but it'll be nice to get into the town. I'm going to have a wander around. Still blowing out there. It's blowing about a force 5 into a 6. So this harbour faces east, so we're well sheltered from the southwest. And we will be in the inner harbour tonight, and I think probably tomorrow, because tomorrow the wind looks as though it's going to go on the nose for where we want to be. Having a lay day in Peel, which is very nice, is fine. It gives us an opportunity to fix a couple of minor problems we had on the way up, one of which was the first reef jammed on the main, so I couldn't get it out, which wasn't a major problem because it was quite windy. So I'm now taking the back of the boom apart, which is good fun. So this thing slides in and out, complicated process, and that's the first reef, and that's the second reef. And this one was jammed, so I thought I'd done something wrong with this, but actually what it turns out is, if I can look at it, that this block in the first reef, second reef even, has completely collapsed, and bits of plastic were jamming this thing from sliding back and forward, so I couldn't release the reef. And the problem is I've used the wrong kind of block in here. I only had one available at the time. It's a ball bearing block, which I thought would be strong enough, but isn't strong enough, and it's collapsed. So I've now got to get rid of this. Plus, actually, a lot of bird nest material from
the winter, and get that back together again with a new block on this one. So I'm glad we found it, but a bit of a pain.
Well, the moral of the story is don't use ball bearing blocks thinking they'll reduce the friction in your reefing system, because they just aren't strong enough. At least this one wasn't. So pleased we found that. It's taken me 2 hours to take it apart and replace it with a plain bearing block, but that could have been a bit of a problem if we'd got it jammed sort of half in, half out, reefed in heavy weather. So as ever on a boat, there's always some bloody thing, and that was one of them. Well, it's the fond farewell to the Isle of Man. We've really enjoyed a little stay in Peel. It's now Thursday morning and we're on passage for Carrickfergus on the Irish coast. It's in Belfast Lough. It's about 50 odd miles, so it takes about 8 hours, I guess, and we've got perfect conditions.